Hello everyone, and welcome back to Conspiraseed. Today we're going to be doing part 1 of tier 6 of the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. Again, this one's going to be broken out into multiple parts because it is a long tier. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today. If you have any videos ideas, leave them down in the comments down below, and let's just get into it.
Nothing like being subscribed to Conspiraseed on YouTube. Nothing like it.
The Stone Man is the name of a serial killer in Calcutta, India. He killed at least 13 homeless people in 1989. The name was also given to a perpetrator of a similar series of murders in Mumbai from 1985 to 1988. It's been speculated that these are in fact the same person, so it's possible that he could be responsible for as many as 26 murders. With the Mumbai killings being first, we'll cover them first. Starting in 1985 and lasting for about 3 years, a series of 12 murders were committed in Mumbai. The killer or killers would find an unsuspecting victim, usually a homeless person, sleeping alone in a desolate area. The victim's head was then crushed with a single stone weighing as much as 30 kilograms or 66 pounds. In most cases, the victims' identities could not be determined since they slept alone and did not have relatives or coworkers who could identify them. Since the victims were homeless and the crimes were not high profile, it was difficult to get any information. It wasn't even until the 6th murder that the Mumbai police began to see a pattern in the crimes. A homeless waiter survived one of the attacks and managed to escape and report it to the police. However, since the area was dimly lit where he was sleeping, he was not able to get a good look at the attacker. In the middle of 1988, the killings suddenly stopped. It's never been confirmed if the Calcutta and the Mumbai killer are the same person. However, the similarity in weapon, choice of victims, execution of crime, and the time of the attack suggests that the killer was at the very least familiar with the Mumbai killer, if not the killer himself. The first victim in Calcutta died from injuries to the head in June of 1989. 12 more murders attributed to the Stone Man were reported within the following 6 months. All of the murdered were homeless people who slept alone in the dimly lit areas of the city. Because the murderer killed victims by dropping a heavy stone or concrete slab onto their head, the police assumed that the killer was probably a tall, well-built male. However, since no one has ever seen the killer, there is no confirmed physical attributes. Police were deployed to various parts of the city, and a number of people were arrested. After a handful of arrests were made, the killing stopped. However, all the suspects were released back into the public due to lack of evidence. The Tokyo Metropolitan Murders refers to a series of unsolved murders between 1968 and 1974 in the greater Tokyo area. The killer would attack and rape women living alone who he killed at midnight, then would burn their corpses. Most of the victims were in their 20s. In total, 9 cases were recorded and another 2 were thought to be linked due to the similarity of the crimes. A 37-year-old construction worker named Etsu Ono was arrested on suspicion of theft, and he was linked to all 10 of the killings. At a trial, he was sentenced to life in prison, but later he was subsequently acquitted of the murder and released from prison. At this point, the statute of limitations on these killings has expired. The sewer murders are a series of murders against male teenagers in Germany during the 1970s and 80s, specifically 1976 to 1983. The victims were 7 boys between 11 and 18 from Frankfurt, where some of them may have worked as prostitutes when they met their killer. The boys' hands were tied behind their back with a rope and then killed by blunt force. For some of the boys, their fate was met via drowning in the sewage. Due to the amount of time in the sewage, the victims were not able to be identified right away, if at all. On September 7th, 1976, an unidentified male was found wearing only socks near a hiking trail during a military drill. The body was determined to have been there for at least 6 weeks, and a skull fracture had been found to be the cause of death. Since the identity could not be determined, the police assumed that he was a foreigner. On May 23, 1982, a body was found behind a sewage inflow. The body had significant damages and was probably laying there for over 6 months, and the cause of death could not be determined. On September 19, 1982, a collection scoop at the sewage plant was blocked by a body. Odds are that he was still alive when he was thrown into the manhole and most likely drowned. On July 2, 1983, a body was found in the sewage of a sewage plant. His hands were handcuffed, but there was no external injuries visible. On September 9, 1983, the body of a 14-year-old Moroccan boy was found in a sewage treatment plant. At first, the police assumed that he had drowned accidentally, but then it became clear that he had been murdered. On October 11, 1983, the youngest victim, 11 years old, was found at the sewage treatment plant. He had leg cuffs on his body and was pushed into a manhole. He had run away from home and was never seen alive again. On June 21st, 1989, the last body was found in a drainage system. Only bones and pieces of clothing were found, as he had been missing since 1983, 6 years earlier. The Father's Day Bank Massacre was a bank robbery and killing that happened on June 16, 1991 in Denver, Colorado. The perpetrator killed 4 unarmed guards and held up the 6 tellers in the bank's cash vault. The United Bank Tower had allowed its guards to be armed, but had actually changed their policy less than a year before the robbery, requiring the guards to be unarmed. At about 4 a.m. on the day of the massacre, an alarm went off in the basement storage room of the tower. Records showed that a guard in the control center turned off the alarm and didn't take any further action. While this is suspicious, it is unknown if it had anything to do with the robbery. At 9:14 a.m., a man identifying himself as Robert Bardwell, a vice president at the bank, asked for entry through a side freight elevator. He called the bank's guard room using a security phone. A guard responded by riding the elevator up from the guard room. When the elevator door opened, the gunman forced the guard to ride to the sub-basement area of the bank. There, the guard was killed and his body was hidden in a storage room. The killer then made his way through the bank tunnels and up a floor to the bank's basement level, where the vault and the guard stations were. Once he entered the guard room, he forced 2 guards into a battery room where he shot and killed both men. Investigators believe that a 3rd guard returned to the area during or right after the shooting, and upon the guard's return, he was shot several feet away from the room where the other 2 guards lay. Before leaving the guard room, he took 10 videotapes that had his identity, bank keys, a 2-way radio, and the guard logbook as a way to eliminate any trace of him. He then went to a vault where 6 employees were on duty doing cash deliveries. He demanded that the employees cover their eyes and lay on the floor. He then ordered the senior vault manager to fill a satchel with cash from the workstations. Then he forced the tellers to crawl into a small room near the vault, which he locked. Prior to leaving the scene, the robber collected the shell casings that had expelled from the gun. The only evidence he left behind at all were the 18 bullets that he fired. The bank employees said the man appeared to be in his late 50s or 60s, wore a gray sports coat, a white shirt, a multicolored necktie, a brown fedora, and mirrored sunglasses. About $200,000 was stolen. About 3 weeks later, retired police officer James King was arrested. The jury, however, acquitted him, and none of the stolen money was ever found. Charlie Chopoff is the name of an unidentified serial killer known to have killed 4 children between 1972 and 1973. On March 9, 1972, 8-year-old Douglas Owens was found dead, stabbed 38 times. His genitals had been cut, but not severed from his body. On April 20th, another youth was repeatedly stabbed, and his genitals were severed from his body, although he survived his injuries. On October 23rd, Wendell Hubbard was stabbed to death on the roof of a tenement block, and his genitals had also been severed from his body. On March 6, 1973, a 9-year-old boy by the name of Luis Ortiz was stabbed 38 times and also had his genitals mutilated. Lastly, on August 17, 1973, 8-year-old Stephen Cropper was repeatedly slashed with a razor on the roof of a tenement block. He bled to death from an injury to his arm, although his genitals were left intact. There is a suspect by the name of Erno Soto. He was arrested on May 15, 1974, but was an intermittent patient at the Manhattan State Hospital since 1969. The surviving victim said that Soto looked like his attacker, but he could not positively ID him. Despite lack of evidence, investigators still believe that he is a likely suspect, citing the fact that the murders ceased after his arrest. Due to lack of evidence and his acute mental instability, he, however, did not stand trial. The Sleepy Hollow Killer is an unidentified South African rapist and serial killer thought to be responsible for the rapes and murders of at least 13 women. He would strangle his victims using their panties, which is the way that 3 more women were actually killed in 2007, possibly by the same killer. In the late 1990s, several women were raped and strangled with their own panties, and their bodies were found near the N3 highway. In 2001, authorities began an investigation into the murders, exhuming 7 of the women's corpses from graves in an attempt to identify them through facial reconstruction. The investigation led nowhere, and it closed that same year. But between February and October of 2007, the bodies of 3 women were found again near the N3 highway. Like the 1990s victims, they were raped and strangled to death with their own panties, with the only difference being that they were severely burned after their death. There was only one possible suspect, a 32-year-old man, but when questioned, the superintendent of the case said that he did not believe that he was linked to the victims of the Sleepy Hollow killer. Back to Denver, the Denver prostitute killer is responsible for the murder of at least 17 women in Denver between 1975 and 1995. The killings were grouped together in 2008, and until then, each of these crimes were considered to have been committed by a different person. The killer chose young girls and women aged 15 to 25 for his victims. A common pattern was for them to be hitchhikers or to have visited bars or fast food restaurants, and a majority of them being engaged in prostitution. The victims were beaten and strangled, and their bodies were dumped along I-70. Some of the bodies were posed in humiliating positions. While this remains unsolved, a 2005 DNA profile pointed to a 52-year-old Billy Reed. Billy had previously been arrested and charged with 2 separate murders. He was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. No evidence incriminating him has ever been located except for the trace amounts of DNA that points to him, so these do still remain unsolved. The Wednesday Strangler is a Japanese serial killer responsible for the murder of 7 women in the Sage Prefecture from 1975 to 1989. The nickname comes from the fact that 6 of the 7 victims disappeared on a Wednesday. Between 1975 and 1989, 7 murders occurred within a 20-kilometer radius, all of which the victims vanished during the evening or night. 5 of the deaths were due to strangulation, but the remaining 2 victims were just skeletons when they found them, and their cause of death couldn't be determined. On August 27, 1975, a 12-year-old student disappeared and was found on June 27, 1980, in a toilet stall next to the elementary school pool. On April 12, 1980, a 20-year-old also disappeared in the same way as the previous victim. She was also found in the elementary school bathroom. Hers was the only murder to not have taken place on Wednesday. On October 7, 1981, a 27-year-old disappeared and was found strangled to death in a vacant lot. On February 17, 1982, an 11-year-old was strangled to death while walking home from school. On July 8, 1987, a 48-year-old restaurant employee disappeared mysteriously. She was found dead on the 27th of January 1989 beneath a cliff. On December 7, 1988, a 50-year-old housewife disappeared, and on January 25, 1989, a 37-year-old office worker also disappeared. The previous 2 were found beneath the cliff, with the third one. The Family Murders is a name given to a series of 5 murders in Australia, speculated to have been committed by a connected group of individuals known as the Family. Police believe that up to 12 people were involved in the killings. A cold case review was opened on March of 2008 with a $1 million reward available for anyone who provided information leading to a conviction. The victims are as follows. Alan Barnes, 16, murdered in 1979. He was last seen while hitchhiking. His body had been severely mutilated and dumped in the South Para Reservoir. A post-mortem examination revealed that Barnes had died from massive blood loss from an anal injury, likely caused by the insertion of a large blunt object. Neil Murr, 24, murdered in August of 1979, had been dissected and cut into many pieces, placed in a garbage bag, and thrown into the Port River. Most of his body parts had been placed in a garbage bag and then placed into his abdominal cavity. The head was tied to the torso with a rope passing through the mouth and out through the neck. He'd also died of massive blood loss from an anal injury. Peter Stogneff, 14, murdered in August of 1981, was found in October of 1982 by a local farmer. His body had been cut into 3 pieces in a similar fashion to Neil. Little more could be determined, as the remains had accidentally been burnt by the farmer while he was burning the scrub off his property. Mark Langley, 18, murdered February of 1982, was found in scrub in the foothills 9 days after his disappearance. Among the mutilation was a wound that appeared to have been cut with a surgical instrument that went from his navel to his pubic region, and part of his small bowel was missing. Similar to the other 2 whose cause of death could be determined, he had died from massive blood loss from anal injuries. Lastly, Richard Kelvin, 15, murdered July of 1983, was abducted a short distance from his home on June 5th, and he was found on July 24th by a geologist who was searching for moss-covered rocks. He'd been held captive for approximately 5 weeks, and he had also died from massive blood loss from an anal injury. The Skid Row stabber is responsible for the murders of 11 people in the LA neighborhood known as Skid Row, which is known to have a large homeless population. His weapon of choice was a knife. The murders began on October 23, 1978. As victims, the killer chose the homeless, whose corpses were dumped in the alleyways of various streets located close to each other. During the investigation, there were witnesses found that had seen a murder take place. According to the witnesses, the criminal was a 30-year-old black man who spoke with a Puerto Rican accent and introduced himself as Luther. In January of 1979, the inscription, "My name is Luther, I kill winos, I put them out of their misery," was found in the bathroom of the LA Terminal bus building. In December of 1978, a man named Bobby Maxwell showed deviant behavior against sleeping homeless people and was arrested on charges of disturbing public order. A knife was seized from him during his arrest. While he was in prison, the Skid Row stabber didn't commit any murders, and he was subsequently arrested again on suspicion of murder in April of 1979. Despite the fact that there was no material evidence found in any of the other murders, the public blamed all of the murders on Maxwell, and he was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. Decades later, in 2017, Maxwell suffered a massive heart attack, which caused him to fall into a coma. In a new trial, the LA prosecutor's office dropped all charges against Maxwell, and in October 2018, he was found not guilty, which his conviction and prison sentence were ruled as a miscarriage of justice. He died in April 2019, never regaining consciousness after his heart attack, and was never made aware of his not guilty verdict. As such, the real identity of the Skid Row stabber remains unknown. That is part 1 of Tier 6 of the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. I hope you guys enjoyed watching the video as much as I enjoy making these videos. There's really interesting to learn about and research these topics, but thank you all for choosing to spend some time with me today. I really do appreciate it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.